Well, for you to perceive it, 2 points must hold together, and that's an attraction, but repulse each other and hold apart, else you see them as 1 point. Integrity of existence then is both forces operating. If one is greater than the other, then the object is expanding through time or contracting through time. Ends up as no object at all then if it's expanding through time, because the 2 points get further and further away from each other. Or the 2 points come together if they're contracting more than expanding. The pressure, the force, in which case you end up with 1 point. If a point is non-zero, then it's in some semi-equilibrium, or expanding or contracting. If it's not in complete equilibrium, then it will no longer have integrity. And you cannot build with it. A building is at least a temporary permanence. If the 2 points are expanding a great deal, then that's very impermanent. If they're contracting a great deal, again it's very impermanent, because you're going to end up with 1 point. You can build on that which is expanding or contracting until you end up with 1 point, or at the other extreme, 2 points that are unrelated to each other. They're too far apart to do anything with, and continuing to expand. A point that exists, existence means some integrity. It holds together. It's therefore composed of expanding and contracting forces that have not yet reached an equilibrium. Has the point itself got mass? No, because if it has got mass, it won't be a point, it will be a cluster of points. Any non-zero point is therefore a cluster of points that have this quality of both attraction and repulsion. Integrity from our point of view means a stability of the two, such that we can rely on their distance from each other and use such in a construction with others that are reliably going to hold their distance from each other, then we can build. But if they're all changing, obviously you can't build. So we require integrity for life. Because life requires some order and some existence, some construction. We seek to find a life that's ongoing, by which we mean has some continuity from one moment to the next. We require some stability at least through time. Too much is a dead object. Too little is not enough change. For what we find is most comfortable. Life has a sort of tolerance, required tolerance level, or has a tolerance level that needs to be met. Otherwise one is intolerant and wishes to change it. Life is then ever expanding at its tolerated rate. An intolerable rate is one that destroys life. The chaos sets in. It starts to fall apart. The integrity goes. We have an optimality again then between change and integrity. We need integrity to achieve change. Too much change loses the integrity. Too little is not acceptable. If it is, then we have no change. So there are forces for change and forces for stability. The force for stability is the equilibrium between expansion forces and contraction forces. The stability of life is an acceptable level of change that keeps enough stability for life to continue. Continuity in some sense means some consistency of life through time, but not complete consistency, because that would be death. No change. In other words, it's an equilibrium between the desire or pressure for change and the need for stability to make change possible. There's an equivalence then of counterbalancing forces. Same as with the integrity of matter. We have an integrity of life, or life does not exist. There must be some balance between the pressure to change and the pressure to remain stable. Complete stability means no life. Enormous amounts of change means no integrity through time, no continuity, which is the destruction of life as well. We seek an optimum in the middle, an equilibrium. Just as for integrity of matter, we need an equilibrium between contraction and expansionary forces. Now, at least one of the thoughts that exists with this analysis is that the concept of a point ultimately must be something that has no mass. I think its mass is something to do with purely attraction and repulsion forces, not actual object at all. But it's hard for me to conceive of something that has a quality but doesn't itself exist. That sounds like a non-starter, a contradiction. So I'm not sure where that leaves me. But it's when I got to the understanding of what a point was, that if it's non-zero, then it's divisible. Therefore it's made up of 2 points that are presumably in some form of equilibrium. 2 or more points, of course. And in some conceptual notion we can always divide. Unless the world is made up of, in other words, unless matter is made up of 2 distinct things, such that if you divide down to their individual size, you can't divide any further and still have a point or piece of matter. You get down to, if you like, 1 positive and 1 negative. And if you divide it further, well, you only have a positive or negative. And that doesn't exhibit the qualities that you take to be matter. The qualities that make up matter might be something like attraction and expanding force. If I divide down to the unit of such, then I no longer have matter. I either have an expanding force or a contracting force, which doesn't have the quality of matter. But to talk of a force without it being attached to matter doesn't seem to make sense. Problem. All I know is the practical thing, which is to build, I must have integrity of the objects I'm using to make the building with. Can't make a building of just gas or sand or liquid. material's got to have some integrity, like wood or steel or plastic, or fibres. They may flex, but they still have a longitudinal integrity, tensile strength, if you like. Even elastic has some sort of tensile strength and is very useful in that it's one that can be stretched but wants to return to its original unstretched state. So I can make things with elastic, even though they don't have the integrity, so to speak, or the stability of structure that steel might have, say. Similarly, I can just about build with tensile strength, rigidity, as in paper, cardboard, even though it might not have a rigidity to it. You know, if I push the two ends of the paper together, the paper crumples, unlike the steel, which resists crumpling. I can build with something that has a crumpling characteristic, provided it has some ultimate tensile strength to it. What matters is, in all this, is what I started with, which is to build, I must have integrity. Something about God has this integrity of personhood, of being, of some constancy or at least predictability through time that can be built on or with. And so we are in relation to God. We too have some potential integrity through time. And so we can be a fellowship with God like him as God needs for fellowship, if he needs fellowship. And he does need it if he hasn't got it, because he'd be, in some sense, well, I want to say lonely or inadequate, but I've got in mind that my definition of God tends to be a notion of complete, but at the same time alive, so changing. If he's not changing, he's not alive. I feel God is life. It's both existence, which is integrity, but life, which is change with integrity. In other words, an evolving, I don't like to use the word evolving, it's a bit anti-Christian experience, isn't it? A stability that's moving towards a greater complexity, but maintaining enough stability through time to achieve that greater complexity. So why is God wanting to move through time? Why not just, because if he doesn't change, he's dead. If he is life, then he is by definition change. The potential of change and actual change, at least in some time periods, if not continuously through all time periods, if he's complete life, or at least that's what we would define as complete. And the completeness must have a stability through time, else it can't be built on. Predictability, if you like, starts to vanish. I don't think it's the case that God knows the future. He's simply capable enough to determine the future. But what he determines is open, but according to certain principles, like survival. He wants life to exist. If he didn't, life would not exist. But clearly we have the problem. So rather than Descartes' thing, I think the certainty of life, the certainty is that I'm experiencing what I take to be life existing. That consciousness exists. Is what we rely on, else we could. Consciousness exists. It must be there, else the problem doesn't exist. We are experiencing what we think is the problem of consciousness. So we exist. What Descartes says is, I think, therefore I am. I think he's saying that thinking and being are the same thing. It's a tautology, a truth that must be so by definition. That I can't be thinking without an object existing doing the thinking. Now we had that problem with matter, didn't we? Can the point exist with no mass and yet have these qualities? Well, can anything have qualities if it doesn't exist? That's logically troublesome, to say the least. And we're getting the same with life. If I'm puzzling over what life is, if there's a puzzlement going on, it can't go on without something experiencing or doing or being in existence to be experiencing the puzzlement. So I think, therefore I know I exist, but I haven't tied down what existence means. I just know I exist, else I couldn't have, or else the problem can't exist. The problem can only exist in relation to existence of something. I haven't said really what the something is. I'm calling it a person, I. And perhaps there are other persons that seem to exist to me too, you and so forth. And indeed, at least superficially, if they don't exist, I couldn't have come into existence, if they didn't exist anyway. I couldn't come into existence now. They may not continue to exist, parents die, but they must have existed for me to exist. This discourse is reaching its time limit from the point of view of what the mind can reasonably grapple with successfully. So I'm going to leave it here. Have I achieved any advance in understanding? Am I benefited from this discourse? Or are you? Is anyone benefited? If not, there's no point in keeping it, is there? Thank you, Dad.